Hello friends, patrons, Rob Caskie, proudly telling stories. I was lucky enough recently on my return from Antarctica on that famous journey from Cape Horn to Cape Town to visit Tristan da Cunha. Now Tristan da Cunha is regarded as perhaps the most remote inhabited island in the world, about 1,200 nautical miles off the coast of Cape Town. And Tristan da Cunha is named after its discoverer, a Portuguese navigator and captain called Tristan da Cunha, who was a great colleague and compatriot, in fact, of the famous navigator and Portuguese sailor Albuquerque. It was discovered in 1502, around the same time as the discovery of St Helena, and one really needs to look at the discovery of both these islands alongside of one another, because in the early days when the Portuguese ships were setting off for the spice-rich east, they had the first part of the journey that was incredibly hot, uncomfortable, and unfortunately associated with much disease from Europe, literally with the trade winds down towards the coast of Brazil. From Brazil, they then turned eastwards and headed across using the trade winds to get around the Cape of Good Hope and up the east coast of Africa. And of course, around the Cape, they then had to deal with extremely rough seas and very cold temperatures. And then onwards from there up the Mozambique coast, where once again heat and disease was a major issue for the men on board of the ships. And it's interesting to note that in the 120 years from roughly 1480 through to 1600, only half of the ships that set sail from Portugal returned. The bulk were lost at sea or floundered on rocks. Half the crew died because of the horrendous conditions on board of the ships. So Tristan da Cunha discovered what is now known as Tristan da Cunha in 1507. It was a place used in the early days as a replenishment station, largely for water. Much the same as St Helena was used, they would eventually release animals onto the island to breed up and hopefully be used as food for the passing ships. Now, the island group of Tristan da Cunha involves three main islands. Tristan da Cunha itself, which is an extinct volcano, St Mary's Peak, a nearby island called Nightingale Island, and another island called Inaccessible Island. An Inaccessible Island has cliffs all around it, making it almost impossible to land upon or to spend time on, hence that most appropriate of names. We were lucky enough to do a zodiac tour around the one side of Nightingale Island that was simply spectacular. Some of you may have seen my posts on Facebook of those lichens and natural ochres on the side of the cliff that look almost painted by the most talented of artists. Now we need to fast track our story a little here to 1815. We have discussed often the issue of Tambora, the huge explosion in Indonesia that sent that ash cloud into the atmosphere that drifted off westwards and caused major climate change. Of course, 1815 is the year that Napoleon was defeated by Wellington at Waterloo, and he was exiled to St Helena Island. And because of his miraculous escape from Elba, they were afraid of him escaping again. So the British decided to make Tristan da Cunha a British dependency in 1816 and established soldiers there that at least they had a base from which they could launch any sort of search party or relief party should the French try to rescue Napoleon from St Helena. It's an incredible story because the distances between the islands are absolutely enormous. Now, it would be fair to say that there was a very small group of men initially established on the island. The first patriarch of the island was a man called Glass. And then some mixed race women were imported from the Cape Colony to join the desperate bachelors on St Helena. So if one is to look at the DNA on Tristan da Cunha rather, if one is to look at the DNA of these people living on Tristan da Cunha, it is indeed of a very, very mixed background, and I think that is partly what makes them so hardy and indeed so interesting. It would be fair to say that in 1885 there was a terrible, terrible disaster on the island when a longboat went out to trade with a passing ship. Rough seas created an accident with a boat, and 15 of 19 adult men on the island drowned in one incident, leaving only 4 adult men remaining on Tristan da Cunha. Now, the island was set up largely with livestock, cattle, sheep and goats, and of course, potato crops. They have wonderful, wonderful potato patches, or potato crops on Tristan da Cunha, and indeed in days gone by, potatoes were traded pretty much as the currency, and they always felt that if they had enough potatoes, they could survive indefinitely. It was their staple food. And the settlement or village on the main island of Tristan da Cunha with that classical volcanic shape is called Edinburgh of the Seven Seas. And it's named after the Duke of Edinburgh, who visited the island in 1857. And indeed, the modern Duke of Edinburgh, who passed away recently, was to visit on Her Majesty's yacht Britannica shortly before the major volcanic eruption took place in 1961. Now, the folks on Tristan da Cunha, although entirely dependent on South Africa pretty much for all their supplies, their postal facilities, their medical resources and so forth, really do not want to be aligned with South Africa because of our racist apartheid past. So they align themselves very closely with Britain. They even have a British postal code on the island. And I am intrigued to tell you that when the island erupted and lava got within 300 yards of the houses of Edinburgh of the Seven Seas, the entire population took off in their longboats, which are unable to be left in the sea. Because of the roughness of the seas and the shores there, they have to be removed. They have to be pulled up the beach, or in fact offloaded by a crane, pulled out of the water and put onto solid ground that they be kept safe. Now, the folks on Tristan da Cunha have become, as a result, the most incredible sailors and navigators. Their skills in the open sea are quite extraordinary. But they moved en masse from Edinburgh of the Seven Seas across to Nightingale Island, where many of them have built little shelters and houses, what they call holiday houses. But there's no fresh water on Nightingale Island, so all your fresh water needs to be brought along too. And they would be evacuated shortly thereafter from their holiday houses to Cape Town, and indeed from Cape Town to England, where they lived in Surrey in a little part of a village, Calshot, appropriately called Tristan Close. But they all chose to come back to Tristan da Cunha, and they were returned to Tristan da Cunha in 1963. Now, Tristan da Cunha, on account of its remoteness, is a place that so many travellers, the die-hard travellers, would really like to visit. The fishing there is remarkable. Unfortunately, with the introduction of alien animals and shipping in days gone by, there's also been a major influx of rats and mice, which have played havoc with the local bird populations, which all nest on the ground. The rats have been cleared from Inaccessible and Nightingale Islands, thankfully, and the bird populations there have been able to restore themselves with great success. The folks on the main island of Tristan da Cunha do not want measures taken against the rats and mice because they're afraid of the safety of their livestock, upon which they are very dependent, the sheep, the goats, and the cattle. But it really is a quite remarkable place. The folks down there are deeply tanned. Many of them have olive skins. They tend to be heavy-set, hard-working people, incredibly hospitable. I don't think any one of the homes has a working lock or key. And for the folks who live on Tristan da Cunha, it's a lifestyle few of them would trade for anything else. I think for many of the youngsters, they've chosen to move on and try their luck elsewhere. Many in days gone by moved to the Cape, others to Europe, some off to America. But I was fortunate enough and very grateful for the opportunity. We weren't allowed to land on account of COVID concerns, but the captain on our ship with the Silver Sea, Silver Whisper, took our ship quite close to Edinburgh of the Seven Seas. We could see the town clearly. Looking with binoculars, we could see all the livestock. Moving off, of course, we could see the potato patches. And there's a lovely book written called rockhopper copper, which really refers to the huge populations of rockhopper penguins on these islands, and the fact that the local policeman who wrote the book, his job was as much involved with conservation and keeping a record of the numbers and the decreases and increases in the number of penguins and other seabirds as it was with preventing crime, which thankfully is almost non-existent on the island. The island has, of course, had its fair share of brigands and mercenaries and pirates come by. There was recently a German fellow arrived on the island, and the locals were a little bit suspicious of him, and they noticed that on the back of his yacht he had very carefully tried to paint out the original name of the yacht and paint a new name upon it, and they found out that he was a drug runner and quite a well-known criminal who was running for his life. He'd come on some hard luck, run out of food and water, and really was trying to take advantage of their hospitality, and they dealt with him quite perfunctorily, as the Tristan de Cunhas always would. But in terms of the modern history, I think that those who want to visit remote places and those who really want to get out to some of the remote Atlantic islands, one wants to visit Tristan de Cunha. And because it was discovered at around the same time as St Helena, I've always advocated that one should investigate the histories alongside one another and perhaps read a book called The Other Exile, written about a remarkable Portuguese exile called Fernão Lopes, the most well-known exile who lived out his latter years on St Helena. I hope you've enjoyed that little interlude. It would be fair to say that as a water station and as a replenishment station in days gone by, it lost its importance with the coal-fired steamships and of course the opening of the Suez Canal. But in days gone by, when these islands were discovered by the Portuguese kept their location a secret from the maritime world for some years, trying to defend their own interests and having these islands as almost a secret stowaway for water and food replenishment on their trips, that difficult trip from Europe towards the Brazilian coast, round the Cape of Good Hope, and then onwards. And it was on those journeys, often blown off course by the winds, that these remarkable islands, namely Tristan da Cunha and St Helena, were discovered. Thank you very much for your time.